And then this is gonna be in 3 segments, so I'm gonna stop the recording and restart if that works. We'll see. Do you wanna get my spotlight up? All right, so I went to Egypt in November of 2018, and this are some of the highlights of the pictures. Actually, what I'm going to show tonight, given that we have 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization, I thought I would show 3,000 photos, and so
Ready, go.
I'm going to start
Egyptian
trivia. And did you know that orange cats and red cats are not found in nature? Really, most cats were either gray or brown. And kitties who are red and orange that were originally bred in ancient Egypt. And so they bred them, and they were highly, highly prized for their color. Now we think of them as being so common. And another piece of trivia, this is the hieroglyph on the right is top. It's actually TP or tup, as it would have been pronounced, and it's the top of the head. And so that's sort of an interesting piece. This is a interpretation of the cartouche, or when you see hieroglyphs that are have a oval or circle around them, that would indicate someone's name. And so this is one of the original recordings of Cleopatra. Cleopatra. This is the Rosetta Stone, which was used to first decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, and was recently discovered that there are some errors and some translation errors, because it was in 3 languages. It's Greek and Demotic, which is like a Coptic language, which was spoken in Egypt when this was carved in about 200 years before BC. And then, but there's just a couple of errors that they have, not major things, but kind of minor. So they've carried through during the years of being kind of the wrong word. A fun piece of trivia. This is the mummy of Ramses II. He was one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egypt. He lived to be 90. I think he reigned for 66 years.
Wow.
In the 1970s, they determined that his mummy was starting to deteriorate, and they wanted to ship him to Paris for evaluation, and they did some work on him or whatever. Well, the Egyptian law said if you have to have a passport to transport a dead body out of the country. And so they got Ramses a passport. My other interesting piece of trivia, this is one of my travel mates, Marie, and she was really into humming and singing and checking out the acoustics of various sites, which was really interesting and amazing. It is illegal to do any kind of ritual, a chant, prayer, meditation, singing, humming is not legal. And so we could have gotten busted for that. So if we had this code word, it was Ramses II. We would, if we saw an official coming and we were doing something bad, then we would yell out, Ramses. This is Zari Hawass, excuse me.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
Who you've seen on television. He's the former minister of antiquities. I had the opportunity to do my tour with him, but I thought if I had to be on a bus with him for 2 weeks, I'd have to stick a needle in my eye. Well, anyway, we saw his filming one day, and this is kind of interesting. His education, he got his master's and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and that was paid for by the Edgar Cayce Institute.
Wow.
Wow, that's interesting.
Mark Lenner, who you may have seen on television as well, he's been on both PBS and National Geographic. He has his PhD from Yale, and actually he did his PhD to try to validate some of Edgar Cayce's work and writings, and so his doctorate was also funded. He's, but he gets his money from the government and doesn't talk about that anymore. So
Here, Mom, hold on.
I don't recommend this book because it's the most boring book in my library, but this book also says that the Egyptian library in Alexandria in the Ptolemaic and late period was plundered by the Greeks, and therefore Western or the Greek philosophy really originates from Egypt.
There's Corinne.
Corinne, welcome. Nice to see you. Corinne, I'm sorry. And my last piece of trivia, I just learned this on NPR this week that the United States gives Egypt $2.5 billion per year for their military. And while it provides some stability in the region, and that's its intent, there were some concerns about some human rights issues that haven't been really fulfilled. If I were to administer that, I'd say, yeah, put $1 billion into their sewer systems because God, and then another $500 million maybe towards the Humane Society because they need to work on that as well.
Oh boy.
So our program tonight, I just want to kind of talk for a few minutes about why I went to Egypt when I did. I'm going to show pictures of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo to start with, and then what it was like to travel there. And I've got a little history lesson. I'll try to keep it brief, but it's very enlightening because my aha or biggest takeaway was how different Egypt was in the Old Kingdom versus the New Kingdom and the late period. And so much of what we see on television is the later Egyptian version. So we'll get to see pictures of sites from the Old Kingdom, and I've kind of grouped them into by age, new and middle, and then Ptolemaic period would have been during Cleopatra. So we all went to the Rosicrucian Museum when we were kids, and I've got a picture on the right. I think that's the Leland Stanford Jr. Museum, which also had mummies. I mean, we went to both of these.
Oh my gosh.
At White Oak School, we had field trips down there as well as going with our family.
Also ancient history, go on.
I went to Humboldt State University and I was a history minor. So back in 1981, I took about 1.5 years of history, and I got to not only take ancient history, but also a special elective in Egyptian history and Egyptology. So that's 40 years ago. And I think a lot of what the things have changed in terms of our understanding of ancient Egypt, but I've always wanted to go. I found out when I was at Humboldt that my grandparents on my mom's side had gone in 1980. This is my grandmother riding a horse.
Oh my gosh.
I know, she was 70. And I didn't want to go to Egypt when I was that old. I mean, this is what I had to deal with in terms of some of the sites that I wanted to see, to climb down an 85-foot ladder that was kind of rickety, or crawl underneath the pyramids in various tunnels and so forth. I wanted to go before I got too old. I've also been practicing and teaching a form of meditation, which is called the Melchizedek method. And it's Merkaba meditation, and I can trace that back to Judaic origins. But some of the teachings that go with this this meditation technique go back to Egypt, and I'm a little skeptical, so I wanted to validate some of that as well. So I did find a special permissions tour that allowed us to go into sites not open to the public. And I'll point some of those out. I think we went into 9 sites. They typically cost about $2,000 for a permit to go to take your group in. We only had 9 people in our tour. I think because it was over Thanksgiving, it was kind of small. And this is our tour guide on the left, Yusuf Awan. He's Egyptian. His wife is American, and his father was a very well-known Egyptologist and tour guide as well, up in the upper right. His father had a master's degree from both University of Cairo and University of Paris. but he comes from the Kem tribe. And so has thousands of years of oral tradition, kind of like our Native American oral tradition as well. And that had a lot of insight and some disputes with some of the modern thinking. So I was really lucky to get into this group. It was also held in November, and when it was cool, I didn't want to go during the summer months. Now, Hakeem had 11 children, and they all still live in the same house. He's passed away, but their house is right across the street from the pyramids. In fact, this building next door is blocking the Sphinx, but
Wow.
from a different angle, they look right out onto
Look at
the
that view. That's like $1 billion view.
and really a neat place. The down on the first floor is like a storefront where they sell Egypt stuff. So this is where I'm going to use my pointer. So normally people fly into Giza. I fly into Cairo, excuse me. Giza is about 45 minutes southwest of Cairo, and they'll do the Giza Plateau thing, and then they get in a plane and they fly to Luxor. And you can see Luxor and Karnak. Karnak's the largest temple in the world, and it's pretty impressive. And right across the river is the Valley of the Kings. So people will kind of do that tour and then sail down the Nile to Aswan. We actually drove this entire route down to Luxor and were able to see stuff that's really off the beaten track. So what a treat.
Yeah.
You have a map, perhaps, so if you've or you've got,
Yes. We've got our
and
map.
also a timeline. So this is where the ruins. So we would have done day trips from Giza down to Dashur and Saqqara, where the bent pyramid and the step pyramid are. But we drove down to Amarna, which was the city that was built by Akhenaten, who was kind of thought to be kind of a heretic. And I'll dispute that. But we got to see those ruins, and then we went into Abydos. You'll see Dendera, and then Karnak, and then I'll show pictures down to Aswan. This is the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and they're, of course, building a grand Egyptian museum in Giza, which is like 87,000 square feet. It's been delayed and delayed and delayed, so it's not open yet. But some of the wares in here, particularly the King Tut exhibit, will be moved or has moved over to the Grand Egyptian Museum. This building was, I think, built in 1904, 1905, French architecture. Kind of neat inside. And my only one major, I have maybe two challenges or complaints about my tours. It was hard for me to be tethered to a group for so long. I mean, I only had maybe 15 minutes of independent time during a bathroom break to go run around. But my first picture, which I really love, this is a pet dog that's been mummified. This dog is 3,500 years old.
No way.
BC. He was the pet of a nobleman, as was this baboon. And so they were found in the tomb of this nobleman, and you can kind of see the photo there of how they were found in his tomb, and how well preserved they are. I thought that was amazing.
That is amazing.
I know. it is.
No.
Like petrified forest.
We'll see other crocodiles, but there was a whole period where they were mummifying crocodiles for sacrificial, offerings to the Sobek god and stuff like that. But this one was huge. This is Menkaure, who was associated with the third pyramid, the smallest pyramid on the Giza Plateau. Well, the smallest of the major ones. And I point out that his face looks very Caucasian. There is a mix of Caucasians, Asian, facies, Negro, as well as the Middle Eastern. So Egypt really became kind of a melting pot because there was so much wildlife, and I think it was just really flourishing. In the museum here, these are Coptic jars where you would have put the organs of someone who was mummified. So they took out the brain and threw that out. They left the heart and the body, but they would have separate jars for the lungs, the liver, the intestine, stomach, and so forth. Also in the Egyptian Museum are the geese of Medium. Now, this painting was around 25 to 2600 BC. So we're looking at a painting that is 4600 years old.
Wow.
Amazing.
That's crazy.
Our guide and I, the thesis of our tour was that the ancient Egyptians did have technology. It may not have been run by electricity, but it might have been more than just having a ramp and a pulley and some logs as rollers and maybe some rope. So that they were known to have drills and saws. Those saws might have been run by humans running around on a gearbox or something. But this is an example of a box or maybe a sarcophagus made of granite. They would have taken the whole piece of granite, carved out the other side to make the box, and then the back side they would have cut the lid so that it all came from one piece and the granite sort of matched.
Wow.
This was broken off during when it was made, but it shows really the precision of what looks to be a saw that is cutting the top off the box, because I don't think we would get that with copper chisels. Probably not. This is could be a vase, but it is, they call it the schist, and schist being like the type of sedimentary rock that it was carved from. But you can sort of see this is stone. And how interesting the carving is. And the oral tradition says this was an anti-gravity device of some kind.
Wow.
All right.
This is a game from ancient Egypt with the animals and the balls and the dice, and amazing.
Oh my God.
Yes. Wow.
These are wigs from ancient Egypt that are preserved, that are so many thousands of years old, and they're not made of human hair, they're made of animal hair, but you can see what people were wearing on their heads.
Weird. It looks like it's just in a regular cabinet, like it's not even in a pressured, hermetically sealed something.
Correct, and this is cabinets probably from the turn of the century. So, I mean, this museum's really old. And I just wish I had more time to run around and see this stuff on my own. But on the left, you see a hand mirror from ancient Egypt, and this would have had a mirror finish that the person could see themselves. And some jewelry on the right, very old. We did notice that some of the statues seem to be of men seem to be circumcised, and somebody in the tour group made a comment about that, and our guide said, well, circumcision was invented in Egypt. And so this was another scene in the museum where they were actually performing that.
That's crazy.
Ouch. This is the prenuptial agreement that's been carved in hieroglyphics in stone. And then another prenup agreement that's on papyrus. This is a lot newer. And as I recall, this one said, it's from the nobleman to a noble woman. He said, you come to this marriage with a kettle and a cow and all this fabric. And so if I leave you, if you leave me, you'll get all this stuff back. And he listed it again. And then if I leave you, you'll get all that stuff back, and you'll also get one goat per month.
Interest, yeah.
That was nice.
Generous guy.
Must have really wanted her.
Exactly. She goes to the hobby.
Oh, there's your food.
Now there's my food. I flew from Albuquerque to Chicago to Paris and then Paris to Cairo, I took Egypt Air. No alcohol, of course, in Egypt because it's, but on Egypt Air too because it's Muslim. But you can see kind of our shrimp and couscous in a salad and some cheese and fruit. And
Was it good?
yes,
Okay. It looks good.
all of the food that I had there was mostly Mediterranean, was out of this world.
Mhm.
Just in preparation, a friend of mine said, Drew, you're not only going to not want to drink the water in Egypt, you're not going to want to rinse your mouth out in the shower, brush your teeth, have any ice drinks. And she said, beware that watermelon does not filter out some of the amoebic dysentery.
Oh, wow.
The other foods do, but so I avoided watermelon. I did not get sick. I did get a little queasy one morning, but I took my black walnut, which I had packed, and that really helped. And the other people who did get sick, I shared my black walnut with them. My pocket flashlight, which the guide called it. Drew, can I borrow your torch?
Exactly.
But the water filter was, really important. This is the arriving into the airport at Cairo. I expected to see, soldiers with machine guns and everything, and it was just a very nice, normal looking airport. And this was our hotel that was right across from the Great Pyramids, the pyramids in Giza. This was a Hilton property. At the front, you could not, there was a gate, and so you couldn't just drive in. You had to pull up, turn your motor off or your engine off, and then the bomb sniffing dog had to circle the car.
Oh my God.
Nice guy.
But inside, and we also had to go through metal detectors in all of our hotels. So a lot of security. They really don't want any harm happening to Americans. And when you hear about some of the car bombings and things that have occurred, those have been with Chinese or other nationalities. It's not Americans. But anyway, beautiful interior. This was our coordinator who always made sure we were fed and had bottled water and so forth. And we traveled around in this van. Again, there were 9 of us, mostly American, a few Australians, and one woman from New Zealand. At the front of the van, there was a security man, and he's got a pocket machine gun under his coat here. So we always had a security guard, but when we were doing day trips, that's all we had. And then when we were out going down south into the countryside, our first day we had the police car in the front, the military police, and then we had a military vehicle full of soldiers escort us in the back. And so we'd be winding through these little villages, and everybody would stop to wave because we had the military in front of us.
Oh my goodness.
Now, it was illegal for me to take this picture because you're not supposed to take photos of the military guys, but they really loved posing with Marie, so they were thrilled to do so.
So young.
I was never afraid on this trip either. I felt very secure, really, except for the children. And this is the same. They would swarm us, and it was the children who would pick you. Was a bigger threat than I think anything else. But cute kids. Fun to see how they're dressed, and
It is.
the dogs. This is the car, and the dogs would follow us. And then finally we did sail down from on a cruise from Luxor down to Aswan, and there were hardly any other people except the 9 of us, our tour, our guides and the tour coordinator, and maybe 2 or 3 other couples. So we pretty much had this boat to ourselves.
Wow. Big.
This was a menu.
Oh,
You know, I can get camel here in Albuquerque, I found out though. So
wow.
it's like
Camel burger, yum.
What does it taste like?
beef.
Oh,
You're supposed to say chicken. Doesn't everything taste like chicken?
Or beef.
camel.
And I
Okay.
love this this is a camel I met when I was going through the second pyramid, and he was very sweet. And I don't think they are treated very well. It's really kind of sad.
Yeah.
Oh,
Did you ride him?
I did not, and I really didn't want to. I mean, you know, you get on them and then they have to get up, and they're all arthritic, and
Mm.
I don't know. I found this magnet when I was in one of the stores, and there was only one. In fact, I put this picture up on Facebook, and my sister replied, "Who's going to get that for Christmas?"
I get it.
But yeah. Terrible pollution.
get it for Christmas.
There's terrible pollution in Egypt, particularly in the northern lower Egypt, or the northern part of the country. The air pollution is just horrible. Sometimes you can't even see. We couldn't see the pyramids some days from our hotel.
Oh,
Other days we could, but apparently they've got a lot of smelting going on that's not legal. But people just throw their trash into the canals, and this is either dredged or they throw their trash against the canal. And these egrets, which should be fishing, are
Mhm.
picking through the trash, and they'd be like really filthy.
Mm.
So a lot of pollution, a lot of traffic. Every Volkswagen bus in the world ended up in Cairo.
Wow.
They're all there.
That's amazing.
So I'm gonna do my little mini history lesson here, which I think is important. When I was in school, you know, we read interpretations of some of the hieroglyphs in the literature, and I always felt like it was biblical language. It was thee and thou and thy, and they would call some of the songs, they would call them hymns, and it was really an indication that you know, in the first part of the 20th century, I think that they were looking at Egyptian history through a Christian lens, but also through a Muslim lens. And this is an important point, and something I've only learned in the last couple of years. The Quran says that the earth and the universe were created, I think, at about the same time. And I asked one of my friends who's Muslim, I've heard that that the universe was created 5,000 years ago, and he said it's not spelled out in the Quran. Some Muslim people and groups think that the universe was created maybe millions of years ago, but others feel that it was created 5,000 years ago. And if that is the case, then it would be blasphemous to think that the Sphinx was carved 10,000 years ago. Even though the geologic record and the erosion around the Sphinx and on the Sphinx indicate that it's probably carved 10,000 years ago. It's probably been remodeled a couple of times, and it was actually remodeled in the Fourth Dynasty, but maybe carved earlier. But the any site of any kind of significance, as many Egyptologists are Muslim and creationists, we know, might be have their sense of timing and time frame. They're maybe seeing that through their creationist lens. I'll just say that.
Putting their personal agenda.
This timeline, I'll point out three things on here. So we see at the top, I put pre-dynastic. There were many tribes along the Nile Valley. I think there were 7 tribes that included the Chems and the Israelites and the Hebrews and several others. They all got along pretty well. And there was a very wet period around 10,000 BC. And they see in the fossil record a lot of lakes and wildlife, birds, mammals were plentiful. People were migrating not only into the Nile Valley, but also from other parts of Europe and Asia. And the population was very, very much booming because of this plentiful food that was available. So the dynasties really show when the country unified under one ruler, which was the pharaoh. And we see the pre-dynastic period, we see the Old Kingdom, then we see these intermediate periods. These were dark ages. They probably started out with a drought, and then followed by famine, and then civil unrest, and sometime foreign invasion. But they were very unstable periods in Egyptian history. So you think about this civilization that's 3,000 years old under the dynastic rule, let alone what was going on before that. Having these dark ages where knowledge was lost. And so there would, then they'd come into a renaissance. And so there was great change during the intermediate periods in architecture and religion, in language, and so forth. And then finally, you see the Ptolemaic rule, which would have been Cleopatra's time, and that would have been Greek rule kind of towards the end. The first intermediate period was probably not drought. They think it was either a meteor strike or volcanic activity that would have caused climate disruption and cooling, but probably less long, but very significant loss and change during these times. And the third intermediate period is it's lasting almost 700 years. So during this time, if we go back into the Old Kingdom, looking at religion and spirituality, they didn't have gods. They were called netters. They were nature spirits. I think of like Finhorn and Celtic teachings that we've got, the nature spirit of the redwood trees and the rabbits, and another nature spirit of the whatever plant and whatever, every animal. But in Egyptian history, then there were netters or nature spirits that you would not necessarily pray to, but you would contemplate with them. So Isis, when you've probably heard of her as a goddess, which would have been late period, in the Old Kingdom, she was called Isit. There was a T, not an S. And you would think about her if you wanted to have a child, or you wanted your children protected from disease and so forth. And in the middle here, we see Thoth, who's kind of a common god, especially in the New Age. But in the old era, Thoth was called Jehudi, and you would call upon Thoth if you were going to write. He was the nature spirit of writing, or Ta to the right. If you were going to build something, Ta would be the person you would sort of contemplate with. And in the New Kingdom, in the Greek rule particularly, the Greeks loved mythology. They loved the gods, and they were really responsible for creating these deities as gods, as opposed to just sort of a spiritual entity. Here you see Horus and Thoth and Isis and Sekhmet, the lion, all protecting the pharaoh. In the Old Kingdom, they built with big, huge blocks. These are 60 and 100-ton blocks of granite at the Osirian water temple. And I didn't take this picture, actually. You can see me in the doorway there with the tan pants and the black shirt. So big, huge blocks. If you look at this next picture on the left, that is a temple to the causeway to the second pyramid. And the blocks there are, some of them are the size of a bus. They're absolutely huge. But when you look at the newer construction in the late period, you see much smaller blocks. And on the right, we see Karnak with blocks that were much more manageable. And in terms of architecture, I mean, well, this is the quarry where the granite was taken in Aswan. Huge gouges where they've been taking stone out. You also see in the old kingdom that the columns would be solid granite. They were very heavy. They could only be so high, so they were short. Whereas in the new kingdom, we see the hyperstyle halls with, they would take blocks and carve them and put another block on top and another block on top and carve it. So because it was sectioned, they could go very high, and the ceilings are very, very tall and much more decorative. This is New Kingdom. We'll see more of this. This is Temple of Horus, or Hathor, I'm sorry.
Is that looking up or looking down?
This is looking up at the
Wow.
ceiling, and it's all kind of constellations and spiritual representation of the spirits in the sky.
Wonderful.
Wow.
But very new. This was actually constructed during Greek rule and into the Roman period, actually. And you could actually walk up onto the roof. There was stairways that you could go up on the roof and look down. This is probably sitting on top of another structure below it, maybe even two structures that were buried in sand, and they, instead of digging it out, they just built on top. The faces were removed by the Coptics, who lived, kind of fled to Egypt during early Roman rule, and early Christians found refuge there, but they didn't like the representation of some of the faces of the cow god, so they scratched them out. But here you really see the recycling that occurred over thousands of years. They would build on top of old buildings, they would tear them down and rebuild them. Of course, over a 3,000 year period, you'd expect that. And this is an example of recycling where they took a stela and some hieroglyphic carvings and made it into a wheel that would grind up grain.
Part one, complete.